Real quick, I'd like to give a massive shout out to all the homies on Patreon who chose to support the cult and help keep the lights on. If you want more information on how to support the channel and get your name up here at these fucking chads, check out the video description below. All right. Hey guys, hope all is well, and I sincerely hope that all of you are enjoying Wrath of the Lich King thus far. As you know, Demonology Warlocks are manhandling raids right now, so I figured it was time for a Demonology Raid guide. We'll go over everything you need to know about raiding as a Demonology Warlock. As you guys know, there are a lot of things that go into playing a Demonology lock, and with that brings a lot of min-maxing and finessing that you can do to ensure that you're sitting comfy atop those damage meters. This is a longer video, so please use the timestamps to navigate to whatever part of the video that you might need. Before we begin, please know that I live stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/CrixVibes in the Guild Fusion as a Demonology main. I have a second Warlock that is purely Affliction, and I also play Shadow Priest and a Boomy as well. Feel free to stop by to ask any questions whatsoever, meet some new friends, or just vibe out. We're just a big ass family in there. Also, if you'd be so kind to hit that subscribe button and the thumbs up, both of which help me grow, and it also lets me know that you guys like videos like these. Lastly, as always, please head over to the Warlock Discord, your one-stop shop for everything and anything Warlock related. And if you are looking for the best written guides, Zephan has you covered with his amazing Wowhead guides, all of which will be in the description below and in the pinned comment. Okay, let's get started. Starting with the general overview of Demonology. Demo Warlocks are the chads of the raid with the highest AoE over all the other specs in the game, and sitting top 3 on single target damage. The biggest thing about them is that they bring the best raid buff in the game in Demonic Pact, which buffs your entire raid with 10% of your spell power when your pet crits. There's more to it than that and much finesse with it, but we'll get into that later in the video. Demonology is also a very good mix of all that a Warlock can bring, to be honest. You have hard-hitting damage over the time abilities that must be kept up at all times, major and must-needed utility, insane and powerful cooldowns like Metamorphosis, which turns you into an unstoppable demon with its own special abilities. You're also one of the only specs with an execute ability, meaning when the boss gets low enough, 35%, you get to spam fast casting and free soulfires that hit for a ridiculous amount of damage. And let's not forget about the almighty Felguard, who came back even stronger and will help cleave your way to the top of any meters. Some strengths of Demonology is obviously Demonic Pact. This is the main raid buff in the game, and the reason that no matter how good or bad Demonology is, you will always bring one. Right now, in random phase 1 gear, my Demonic Pacts are hitting for about 425 to 450 spell power on average, with it going as high as 550 spell power if I get double trinket procs. That is so much spell power for your raid. And also remember, this severely buffs your healers as well, since they heal based off spell power. This makes you literally the best caster healer support in the entire game and for the entire expansion. Demonology also has very high bursts and even higher AoE potential thanks to Metamorphosis, Immolation Aura, and the fact that you literally have your entire powerful Warlock toolkit at your disposal, and you could use all of your abilities while you're in Metamorphosis. More on that later in the video though. Lastly, but what seems to be the most people's favorite part, is that the guilds typically feed their Demolocks best in slot gear right away, because the more spell power and spirit, which converts to spell power, that your Demonology Warlock has, the bigger Demonic Pacts will go out. Thus, the norm is to feed the Demo lock, which many people want to play it. As for the weaknesses, Demo doesn't really have too many, but to list some, you will end up with less single target DPS than your counterpart, Affliction. Right now, Demo is manhandling, but more or less because most guilds are stacking their Demo locks up, as they should. Eventually, and to be honest, I'd say soon, Affliction will be the single target spec, and in my opinion, the gap will slightly widen as we go through the phases. Another downside is that there's times that your pet shouldn't be attacking. This doesn't happen too often, largely because even with the changes, you still want to be looking out for when you can send your pet in for the maximum Demonic Pact. But also because even with the new avoidance change, your pet can still get messed up and die. Demo gets severely hampered if our Felguard is not attacking, and even worse if he's dead. Not just for the damage, but also for talents like Demonic Pact and Demonic Knowledge, to name a couple. Lastly, raids typically only bring one demo. There's a stackability with Demonology, however, I think that's more right now and for phase 1 thing, because once Afflictions get more gear, or even towards the end of phase 1 and going into Ulduar, the norm will be one Demo lock and the rest Affliction with some scattered Destro locks around. One thing that should be touched on before going much further is the difference in the types of Demonology Warlocks. You have 2 types of Demo locks. You have the guys who are purely there for support. Their job is to 100% do everything they can do to supply the largest Demonic Pact buff that they possibly can for their raid, even at the loss of their own personal DPS. On the contrary, you have the guys who are there to blast, and that is it. Whether there's multiple demos and they can just blast, or their guild doesn't mind them taking more of a pumper role and losing out on some spell power from Demonic Pact. This is talked about a lot in the Warlock community, and which one you choose is completely up to you, and more importantly, up to your raid leader. The difference in gameplay differs very slightly, but not much at all. Your rotation more or less stays the same, outside of you never needing to hold your Felguard back, and you use potions of speed for the haste rather than potions of wild magic for the 200 spell power. Biggest difference between support demo and personal DPS demo is the gearing. or more importantly, the stats. Without getting too deep into it, since there's a section about this later, the most common difference objectively is as a personal DPS demo, you would choose haste and would gear more like an affliction lock would for the most part. Whereas a full support demo lock chooses the pieces of gear that would give up that haste for a healthy amount of spell power and spirit, and to a degree, even hit rating. There's even some gear sets going around where you can sacrifice a good chunk of hit, but get an even bigger amount of spell power or spirit, thus giving up a good bit of personal DPS in return for some very big demonic packs. A quick example of this is there's a phase 1 support BiS running only 7% hit, but gaining 250 plus spell power. I'm personally a full support demo lock that gives up and will continue to give up my personal DPS in order to buff my raid even more. If you're the only demo lock in your raid, then I would suggest a nice middle ground, giving up some haste pieces for some good spell power and spirit pieces, and also giving up a couple % of hit to achieve the same thing rather than just butchering your hit. But at the end of the day, this decision is solely up to you. Just know that if you're the only demo lock in your raid and they're gearing you up specifically for that reason, then I personally think it's fine to give up some stats to buff your raid. Next up, we'll go over talents. As this is a raid guide, I won't list leveling or dungeon builds, but I will link them above in this video right now if you're looking for information on that, or hey, just stop by the Warlock Discord and check the pins in the leveling or the PvE channel. As for raiding, this is the build I would suggest. Demonology is really straightforward when it comes to choosing your talents, and there's not a lot of wiggle room at all. However, you do have 2 flex points and you can place them wherever you choose. I personally choose to put 1 in mana feed and 1 in intensity. Some people choose to put them both in destructive reach, intensity, improved health zones, or even improved demonic tactics, and most importantly, suppression. Which, while we're on the topic of suppression, it's changed and now covers hit for all spells rather than just affliction spells like it was in Classic and TBC. You should never hesitate to put points into suppression to make up for your hit. And for those wondering, if you need hit rating, then I would suggest putting a point or 2 into suppression over using hit gems. You want to try to avoid using hit gems unless you absolutely need them. To start, 5 points into improved Shadowbolt, Bane, and Ruin are mandatory for rating as a Demonology Warlock, all of which makes your Shadowbolts hit harder and faster while also exponentially buffing your critical strike damage from your destruction spells. As for the Demonology tree, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. You're taking everything that buffs you and your demon. The 3 points in Demonic Embrace gives you some much needed stamina because you will find yourself tanking a mob or 3 at some point. Trust me. Next is 2 points in Fell Synergy. This just helps keep your pet up, healing your Felguard for 15% of the damage you deal. This heals your Felguard comically fast. Some people choose to put 1 point into Fell Synergy and the other point into Improved Healthstone, and that is completely acceptable. This is your car, build it however you want to. I just choose to toss them both into Fell Synergy so I can just never worry about my Felguard's health, just in case the healers have their hands full or whatever the reason. Next is 3 points in Demonic Brutality, which increases the attack power bonus of your Felguard's Demonic Frenzy by 3%. This is just a nice buff to your Felguard. Next is 3 points into Fel Vitality, which will increase the stamina and intellect of your Felguard by 15%, and then increases your maximum mana by 3%. This is also a very big deal. As for Health Funnel, this is largely a PvP talent, and I very rarely even use Health Funnel in Raid. Dropping down to the next tier, 3 points in the Demonic Aegis, which will increase your Fel Armor buff by 30%, which is massive as it gives you an additional 54 spell power, as well as 9% more from the Spirit to spell power conversion. Then you have Feldom, which is only a 3-minute cooldown now and used quite frequently. Not just for the random rare Felguard death, but because you will be weaving in Infernos and you'll quickly want to be able to get your Felguard back out. This, mixed with Master Summoner, are perfect for that. Soul Link was changed and no longer gives us bonus damage, which sucks, but it does transfer 20% of all damage taken, and it gives it to your Felguard, which is really nice for those times that you will pull threat on AoE packs. We know what happens, it just means you're blasting. Unholy Power is just a nice solid 20% damage buff for your Felguard, so we love that. Drop down to Mana Feed, which I personally take, but is not needed if you don't want it. My guild holds W pretty hard, meaning we don't have much time to stop, and I've noticed my Felguard was running low on mana, which isn't a big deal since you can just get another one out, but I'd prefer not to do that, so I just slap a point in Mana Feed. Next is one of my favorite passive talents, Master Conjurer. This increases the rating gain from your Spellstone and your Firestone by 300%. In this case, as Demonology, you only use a Spellstone. But to give you a quick example, without this talent, your Spellstone gives you 60 haste rating. Whereas with this talent, Spellstone gives you 240 haste rating, which is a ton of haste. Dropping down is the 5 points into Master Demonologist, which increases all damage done by 5%, as well as reduces all damage taken by 5%. The next 2 talents are literally my favorite in the tree, and it's what makes Demonology so fun. That's Molten Core and Decimation. Molten Core increases the duration of your Immolate by 9 seconds, but more importantly, your Corruption has a 12% chance to gain the Molten Core effect for 15 seconds. The Molten Core effect buffs your next 3 Incinerates damage by 18% and then reduces its cast time by 30%, Or it buffs your next 3 Soulfires by 18% and increases its critical strike chance by 15%. Which one you cast depends on if your execution range or not. Simply put, if the target is above 35%, you use the Molten Core charges on Incinerates. If the target is at or below 35%, then you use those 3 charges on Soulfire. This is so nice for many reasons. First off, this means during your rotation, you would normally fill with Shadow Bolts in your downtime. Instead, you'll be getting constant Molten Core procs, and you get to use those on the Incinerates, which spices up your rotation to ensure that you do not fall asleep at the wheel. Not only that, but thanks to the next talent, Decimation, you now have a very, very strong execute. Decimation is whenever you Shadow Bolt, Incinerate, or Soulfire any target that is at or below 35% health, the cast of your Soulfire spell is reduced by 40% for 10 seconds. And to make it even better, while under the effect of Decimation, your Soulfire does not cost a Soul Shard. This means as soon as your target hits 35, you can proc Decimation and start spamming Soulfires. This synergizes very, very well with Molten Core, as the dream is to get your Molten Core procs while on Decimation. This happens all the time, and when it does, your Soulfires are casting 40% faster and doing 18% more damage and critting 15% more. It's actually insane and so much fun. This opens up a whole avenue of applying Corruption to additional mobs to gain additional chances at Molten Cores, and then looking for any targets to get below 35% health so that you can snipe them with a Shadow Bolt or an Incinerate. We'll get into this more later, but I choose to rank 1 Shadow Bolt for quick 1-second casts on the ads so I can get my Deci proc fast and start spamming Soulfires into my main target. A very good example is Globulus. He's got those slime ads that come out periodically. As a demo lock, you should be putting 1 corruption up on it as it spawns and then continuing to damage the boss and just wait for the slime to hit 35% and then quickly snipe it with the rank 1 Shadow Bolt to proc Decimation and then use that Decimation to spam Soulfires on Globulus. There are many, many opportunities to do this and on other bosses and throughout the raid as a whole on trash packs, and it's something you should really be looking to do as demo because it's actually huge for your damage and it sets you apart from other demo locks. Anyways, more on that later. Back to the talents. Demonic Empowerment is a good talent and you should macro this ability into your Shadow Bolt, Seed of Corruption, and your Soulfire. This allows you to quite literally take it off your bars and never ever worry about it, since you will always be casting either a Shadow Bolt, Seed, or a Soulfire. Feel free to put it into more spells if you want. Next is Demonic Tactics, which buffs both you and your Felguard with 10% crit chance. Nothing much to say here other than we like crit, right? After that, you have your Felguard, which, well, it's your Felguard. Nothing much to say about him. He does do a ton more damage than he did in TBC, and I hope you had a good name because mine was straight ass. If you're watching this part of the video, do me a favor, put your Felguard's name in the comments. Let's see who's got the dopest one. Also, please like the video if you would. Please and thanks. Yeah, appreciate it. Next is Nemesis, which reduces the cooldown of your Demonic Empowerment, Metamorphosis, and your Fel Domination by 30%. This lowers the cooldown on 3 pretty important abilities. Some people argue that you don't need 3 points in Nemesis, as this was the norm on private servers, but things change with how short the encounters are and the fact that Metamorphosis resets after every boss. Lastly is Demonic Pact, which as I mentioned before, increases your spell damage by 10% and your Felguard's crits apply the Demonic Pact effect to all party and raid members. Demonic Pact increases spell power by 10% of your spell damage for 45 seconds. The effect has a 5-second cooldown and does not work on enslaved demons. This means that when your Felguard crits, it snapshots your current spell power and gives 10% of that to your whole raid. Once again, this is the main reason that you were brought to raid. I'll have a section regarding Demonic Pact and some tips on how to handle it as well. To round up your talents is Metamorphosis. I'm sure by now you all know what it is. This is objectively the dopest ability in the game. This is an Omega cooldown that literally turns you into a demon for 30 seconds. While in this dope ass demon form, your armor is increased by 600%, your damage increased by 20%, and the chances you'll be critically hit by melee attacks are reduced by 6%, and all durations of stuns and snares effects are reduced by 50%. Not only that, but you also get 4 new abilities that are only available while in demon form. The first ability is the main ability of meta and probably everyone's favorite thing about it, Immolation Aura. This ignites the area around you, causing a ton of fire damage to everything around you for 15 seconds. This does phenomenal damage on both AoE and single target. Due to this extreme damage, however, it'll cause an insane amount of threat, especially on AoE packs, so watch out. This ability should always be paired with a nice soul shatter shortly after casting Emo Aura if shatter's off cooldown. This ability is also affected by your haste for faster ticks. For example, at 21% haste, the buff lasts 12.5 seconds and deals damage every 0.85 seconds. Also, since this buff is on your character, each tick of damage is actually calculated using your current spell power, meaning each tick can actually do a different amount of damage as you gain or lose spell power. Also, these ticks can miss, so make sure you're hit capped. The next one is called Shadow Cleave. This ability is exactly as it sounds like. It's a Shadow Cleave. Yeah, so it's a cleave that is only used as a melee swing. And not only that, it also queues with your next swing, kind of like a heroic strike does. It's not suggested to try and use this on cooldown, but rather just macro it with any instant cast abilities and it'll go off on the next swing after that ability goes off. I macro it to meta or emo aura, life tap, and shadow flame. It's funky how it works though, and we can't really get solid use out of it to use it on cooldown. Instead, I just macro and forget about it. Then once you pop meta, emo aura, shadow flame, or whatever else when you're in melee range, you'll get one free one off. You can of course try it again with those instant casts, but the problem is that once you start casting, it cancels that Q and you won't get the shadow cleave off. The third meta ability is Challenging Howl. This is an AoE taunt that will taunt everything within 10 yards to you for 6 seconds. This has niche uses, but to give an example, I was in a 10-man Nax Pug the other day and both tanks went down on a big pack. Trash mobs have been scattered everywhere and they're fucking our healers up, so I blow meta and use this taunt ability to taunt all the mobs to me. The healers then spam healed me, I stayed alive, and I saved the raid from wiping. This happens more often in heroics too. Super niche, not used too much, but you should still have it in your bars because you can literally save your raid. Another meta ability is Demon Charge. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a charge that you can do while in demon form from anywhere between 8 and 25 yards. I love this ability as it allows you to charge mobs to catch up to the group really easily if you fall behind. However, be careful, as in my opinion, you shouldn't be blowing meta and then charging in to use emo aura because you'd be wasting those precious seconds of metamorphosis. Remember that in meta, you have 20% increased damage. So you want to be taking advantage of every second of that meta by seeding, bolting, or whatever situation you're in. If you're blowing metamorphosis and then spending that time charging in, you're wasting a few seconds of good damage. The proper thing to do, in my opinion, is to blow meta once you're in melee range and when you're ready to pump to eliminate the downtime. There are of course times that I do use charge to close the gap after emo aura is done and I'm seeding. It's very helpful to catch up to the raid when you guys are holding W and moving fast, as it's very easy to fall behind when you're spamming seeds. Okay, now that we've gone over the build, let's touch on glyphs. Demonology has some really powerful glyphs that make the gameplay a little more fun. For your first major glyph, you should use Glyph of Life Tap. Whenever you life tap, you gain 20% of your spirit as spell power for 40 seconds. This is very important and you must keep this buff on you at all times. There will be a weak aura to help you keep track of this in the add-on section of the video. Side note, if you're watching this and you have 4-piece tier 7, you do not need to life tap all the time to keep the 4-piece buff up. Just think of that as a really nice bonus for when you would normally life tap. However, when the execute phase begins and I'm about to pop my cooldowns, meta, and all that, I like to tap once just to get the fattest meta and demonic pact and soulfires out. Next, you want to use Glyph of Felguard. This increases your Felguard's total attack power by 20%. Our Felguard is super powerful and is about 20% of our damage, so you can see how this glyph is important. For your third glyph, you should use Glyph of Quick Decay. This allows for your corruption to be affected by haste. Corruption itself isn't that big of damage, but it does give you faster corruption ticks, which results in more molten core procs. Lastly, an honorable mention to Glyph of Metamorphosis. This increases the duration of your meta by 6 seconds. This allows you to get another use of emo aura, but only half of it, and only if you emo aura'd right when you meta'd. This also means that you have 20% more damage for an additional 6 seconds as well, bringing this glyph super close to Quick Decay. Most people, including myself, prefer Quick Decay for molten core procs, but it's worth mentioning because you can find some really niche and nice scenarios for Glyph of Meta. As for your miners, little lackluster here, but just use Glyph of Drain Soul, as this will give you an extra chance at an additional soul shard while drain souling for when you're shard farming. By the way, you can shard farm training dummies. For your second miner, use Glyph of Unending Breath, which allows anyone with your Unending Breath to swim 20% faster. And lastly, use Glyph of Souls, which just reduces the mana cost of your ritual souls. Kind of lackluster, like I said, but that's all we got. Now on to stats. Stat Prio as a Demonology Warlock differs slightly depending on if you're support demo or if you're just there to pump the personal DPS side of things. No matter what you choose, the most important stat is hit rating. In Wrath of the Lich King, you no longer have the innate 1% chance to miss. So if you're hit capped, you will literally never miss, ever. Your first goal as a lock is to make sure that you're hit capped. The hit cap is 17%, which sounds like a lot, but you do get a little bit of help. You get 3% hit from a Boomy's Improved Fairy Fire or Misery from a Shadow Priest. Your 25 man should almost always have either a Boomy or a Shadow Priest in your raid, so this means that you now only need 14%. This becomes much more achievable on your gear if you want. However, you can put points into suppression to lower the hit even more. Each point is 1%. So you put 3 points into suppression, you will now only need 11% hit. And if you're Alliance with the Draenei in your party, you get an additional 1% hit rating from the racial. But like I said, only if they're in your party. That racial is not a raid-wide buff, sadly. This means that if you're Horde, you need 11%, and if you're Alliance, you need 10%. If there happens to be a time that you do need hit, it's suggested that you put a point or two into suppression rather than using hit gems, as you can get more value out of better gems, while allowing suppression to cover what you're missing. Unless of course you need less than 1%, then just use a gem if you want. Side note, I mentioned this earlier, but as a support demo, I'm choosing to give up a few % of hit in order to gain some spell power and some more spirit, which will further buff my raid for Demonic Pact. This by no means is best in slot, but rather just something myself and many others choose to do as a full support. Even now, as I'm gearing, I've been choosing more spell power and spirit over haste and hit. Okay, so now that you're hit cap, what next? Well, to be honest, stack that spell power. Demonology Warlocks love spell power. Not only is it quite literally allowing you to do more damage, but it's also part of your Demonic Pact as well. Whether you're support demo or pumper demo, you want spell power after hit. Now the next stat depends on if you're support or personal. If you're support demo, then you want spirit on as much as your gears you can possibly get. Spirit gives you spell power from Fell Armor and Glyph of Life tap. And as we've learned thus far, we love spell power. Now, on the contrary, if you're not support demo and you're just pumping hard as taking more of a personal DPS demo role, then instead of spirit third, you want haste. Haste is beautiful because you are hard casting a ton as a demo lock, and haste makes those casts get out way faster. And with all the haste, your soul fires will be flying out so fast during your execution range. After that comes crit, int, and then stamina. Next up is professions. I recently posted a brief professions guide that goes over each of the main professions, and I'll link it on screen right now if you want more detail on them. I'm not going to list all of the professions and their benefits, but rather just the main tree. If you choose to go with a different profession, then there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just here to tell you what the best choices are. For Demonology Warlocks, you have a few options. Engineering is extremely strong and is the best profession you can get in terms of damage. You get an insane haste enchant on your gloves that gives you 340 haste for 12 seconds, and it's only on a minute cooldown. This is absolutely phenomenal and is worth engineering simply for that. You can pop this with your trinkets and all your other cooldowns, and as you know, we love haste. But wait, there's more. You get the infamous Nitro Boots, which, just in case you didn't know, you put Nitro Boots on your current boots. It's not a separate pair of boots like it was in Classic and TBC. They not only give us some much needed mobility, but the boots have got me out of some very sketchy situations, allowing me to very quickly get away from things or get to things and continue pumping. One thing I really like about them is that I'm constantly trying to seed to do more damage, which naturally has me falling back from the pack every so often. So I love to use these Nitro Boots to catch quickly back up to the raid so I can continue doing damage. Another perk of engineering is what has been known for years, and that's explosives, and a ton of them. You have sappers, Serenite bombs, and even a frag belt, all of which you must be engineering to use, and all of which give you a solid boost in your overall damage. Lastly, you get a cheeky cloak enchant called Springy Arcana Wave, gives you 27 spell power, and also has the ability to turn your cloak into a Perisher cloak whenever you want. Next profession is tailoring. Tailoring allows you to enchant your cloak with Lightweave Embroidery, which is a proc chance of 295 spell power for 15 seconds with a 60-second inner cooldown. This is phenomenal for demo as it allows you to get some massive demonic packs off, especially on pool, since that's typically when most guilds lust and pop all their cooldowns. Lastly is jewel crafting. With jewel crafting, you get the lovely ability to use jewel crafting only gems called Runed Dragon's Eye. You can use 3 of them, which totals in an extra 60 spell power in comparison to what gems you would be using if you weren't jewel crafting. This is a very solid static spell power increase that you can always count on for your demonic packs. Now, it is slightly more complicated than the other specs. Of course, you can just go engineering and tailoring and be fine, but know that you do have an option here. You can go tailoring for the big Lightweave proc, which will more often than not proc on pull with your trinkets and whatever else, allowing you to snap a very big demonic pack, which at the end of the day is why you're in the raid. However, if you go JC, you get static spell power rather than the proc, giving your raid a nice static spell power from demonic power the whole encounter. Which one you choose is up to you, and they are very close to each other. In the words of the mighty Zephan, who writes all the WoW Warlock guides, link in the description by the way, jewel crafting will always provide us with extra spell power, whereas tailoring will provide us with higher highs and slightly more personal DPS as well. Like I said, it's completely up to you. One of my Warlocks is demo, and I'm choosing to go engineering JC at least until phase 3 when the epic gems come out. Then I'll be swapping that JC to tailoring. Now there's one last combo for you pure support demo locks. This is actually the real best in slot professions for you pure support demos out there, and that's tailoring and jewel crafting. This is actually the most spell power that you can give your raid, considering both tailoring and JC supply more spell power, meaning more value out of demonic pact. The issue with this is that you can't go engineering. Engineering is pretty baseline in the community and is even required among many guilds, but this is not an issue for some people. So if your guild does not require engineering and you're not speedrunning and you feel like you can live without nitro boots and explosives, then I urge you to go tailoring and jewel crafting and be the best support demo that you can be. Enchants are very important and luckily very easy to obtain, since you can now buy most of the enchantment scrolls off the auction house for pretty cheap. However, there are a couple enchants that are locked behind rep, head and shoulders specifically. Head enchant, you must be exalted with Kirin Tort, which is as simple as slapping on a tabard and spamming heroics. As for your shoulder enchant, this is also locked behind rep. Sons of Hodir rep to be exact, and this one isn't as easy to get, as you can't tabard up for this one. I'm not going to go into detail about Sons of Hodir rep or any of these reps because I've already done a video on them and I'll link them right above. Next is your cloak enchant, which will depend on your profession. If you're tailoring, like most warlocks, then you'll use the light weave embroidery on your cloak. If you're not tailoring, but you are engineering, then you can use the springy arcana wave enchant. If you're neither tailoring or engineering, then just pick up a haste enchant for your cloak. For your chest enchant, use major spirit instead of powerful stats. Spirit is nice and you know by now converts to spell power. Your bracer enchant is superior spell power, giving you 30 spell power. If you're leatherworking, you can use the fur lining one, which gives you 76 spell power. However, I don't know any warlocks that are leatherworking. For your glove enchant, if you're engineering, then you can use the hyperspeed accelerators for the haste. If not engineering, then use exceptional spell power, which gives you 28 spell power. Belts don't really have an enchant, but you can get something called an eternal belt buckle, which low-key acts like an enchant. A belt buckle will add a socket to any belt. Easy enough, anyone can use them. However, if you're engineering, you can also use a frag belt at the same time, which stacks with the eternal belt buckle and allows you to toss cobalt frag bombs out for just a little extra damage. For your leg enchant, use brilliant spell thread, which gives you 50 spell power and 20 spirit. For your boots, this will largely depend on your profession. If you're engineering, then you should use nitro boots. If you're not engineering, then you have an option to use Tuskar's vitality for the movement speed and 15 stamina, or you can use Ice Walkers for the 12 hit and crit rating. I prefer the speed from Tuskar's in that scenario. Lastly, your weapon enchant is either Mighty Spirit, which is 63 spell power to a main hand, or is Greater Spirit, which is 81 spell power to a staff. And please notice that one is for a staff and the other one is for a one-hander only. Next up, we'll go over the consumables for Demonology. Your flask should only be the Flask of Frostworm, nothing else to say. For your food, you have a few options. You can use a fish feast, firecracker salmon, or tender shovel tusk steak, which all give you the same amount, 46 spell power and 40 stamina. Most guilds have fish feast, but I always suggest keeping a stack of whatever is the cheaper food on your server out of the firecracker salmon or the tender shovel tusks. There's also a food called Snapper Extreme, which gives you 40 hit rating and 40 stamina. This food can come in handy if you're just shy of some hit and you want to finish it off. But know that as Demo, your goal is to support with demonic pack, so I'd suggest pretty much never taking this hit food. Next up is potions. You have either the Potion of Wild Magic or the Potion of Speed. Both of these potions are very good as Demonology. However, if you're a support, you're there for demonic pact, and for that reason, you should pre-pop a Potion of Wild Magic so that you have that 200 spell power, and then you can use your second Wild Magic potion as you go into execution range. You should wait for your trinkets to get off cooldown, then when your trinkets proc like that sundial, then you use that second potion. This allows you to buff your raid with the largest demonic pack that you can, but also allows you to get good buffed up soulfires. If you're not the support Demonology and you're there for personal DPS, then you're safe to use the Potion of Speed because that is better for DPS. One of the most slept on consumables for Demonology Warlocks is Flame Caps. This is a TBC consume that increases your fire spell power by 80 for 1 minute. This is super nice for your emo auras and your soul fires. This is a 3-minute cooldown, so more often than not, you will only get to use one out of it, and it should be used with all your other cooldowns and your second potion in execution range. This, combined with your trinkets and potions, will make your soul fires hit even harder, and it feels great. Side note, you should pay attention to your guild's kill times. If you see a fight that is lasting a minute or close to it, then you know you're safe to use a flame cap earlier than waiting for the execution range. Look at it like you want the flame cap to end as the boss dies. Side note, flame cap does share cooldowns with hellstones, so be careful. Next is your weapon oil. There aren't weapon oils like in TBC, but rather warlocks have spellstones and firestones. Spellstones give you 1% damage to all your dots and gives you a ton of haste, 240 to be exact thanks to the Master Conjurer talent. Firestone is the opposite as it gives you 1% damage to all your direct damage abilities, which is like your Shadow Bolt, Incinerate, Soulfires, etc. And also gives you 196 critical strike rating. As Demonology, you should be using Spellstone full time. Yes, we prefer the direct damage instead of the 1% dot damage, but that 240 haste far surpasses 196 crit, even with the 1% direct damage increase. And of course, you have pet food. Spiced Mammoth treats give your Felgar 30 strength and 30 stamina. A very solid buff to your pet, plus that 30 stamina buffs you slightly due to demonic knowledge. So feed your pets. Now that we've got all the fine tuning out of the way, let's talk about the most important part, your rotation. I'll break this down to 3 segments: single target, AoE, execute rotation. For single target, do not start at max range. You want to be closer so you have less time running in the meta. Next, life tap for your glyph. This needs to be up the entire fight. Remember, if you have 4-piece tier 7, do not worry about life tapping to keep that 4-piece buff up. Just life tap throughout the fight as you normally would. Next, pre-pot a potion. Wild magic if you supply the demonic pack buff. Haste potion if you're personally DPS pumping. Precast the Shadow Bolt so that the Shadow Bolt lands on the boss when the pool timer hits 0. You can look at the tooltip and see how long the cast is, add a half a second to that and start casting then. This is very important as it will ensure the 5% crit from improved Shadow Bolt is up on the boss right away. Next, pop Metamorphosis, then cast Immolate, then while running into the boss melee range, put up a Corruption and a Curse of Doom. You always want the Doom, unless the boss won't last long enough for your Doom to go off, then you would Agony. Once in range and you see that your trinkets have procced, blow all your cooldowns, your hasted gloves if you're engineering, emo aura, shadow cleave, all that at one time. It helps to have all that built into an all-in-one macro. I'll have one in the macro section towards the end of the video. Next, spam Shadow Bolts as a filler. Use Incinerate on any molten core procs you get. Keep up Immolate, Corruption, Curse of Doom up as much as you can while not clipping Immolate or Corruption. For those that don't know what clipping means, it just simply means to reapply a dot before the duration runs out of the first one. You do not want to do this. For AoE, if meta is off cooldown, I like to put a gateway down before going in. This just ensures that I can get out once my emo aura is done or if I pull threat. Next, I run in with a tank while putting some corruptions up as I'm running into the pack for a little bit of extra damage. Once I'm in range, I pop meta, all my cooldowns, emo aura, shadow cleave, then shadow flame, and start spamming seeds. Once again, you can use the all-in-one macro to make it easier. After a couple seeds, I like to soul shatter to be safe with my threat, and if I'm still having threat issues, I'll just port back out to get some room and keep spamming seeds. If their threat is really bad, there's rare times I'll port out, then wait for whatever mob aggro to me to get to me, and then I'll use my demon charge to bolt back over to another mob, giving me some more space from the mob that's trying to kill me, and also giving my tank time to pick that mob up. Make sure to use Shadow Flame on cooldown, and especially when you're moving, and if you're engineering, make sure to utilize your sappers and your Serenite bombs as much as you possibly can. It's very helpful to have a shadow, like I said, or if you can, a paladin bubble whenever you meta. There's typically enough pallies in the raid to afford a bot. If you don't have meta up for AoE, then just spam seeds while watching your threat. Once the target hits 35%, you've entered execution range, which means you cast Soulfires as your fillers. Hopefully you saved your second meta if the boss is long enough to get a second meta. Before hitting 35%, I like to make sure that I have the mana to spam Soulfires, so I will tap a time or two to ensure that I have mana. This is also just to make sure that I don't have to life tap during my meta, so I don't waste a 20% damage buff from it. It's important to continue keeping Immolate and Corruption up, assuming they'll last on the boss. Both do very good damage, and Corruption gives you Molten Core procs, which are what we're hoping for during our execute. As for cursing, whenever the Doom won't make it, then you can Agony. However, I'll hold off on putting any dots up if I notice that I've had a trinket proc. I'd much prefer to use those huge procs on Soulfires rather than putting up a dot. Then after the proc wears off, I'll just put dots back up if there's time. Next, pop all your cooldowns, your second potion, and start spamming Soulfires. A very important thing to keep in mind while execute is to make sure that you are still keeping up the improved Shadow Bolt debuff for the 5% crit. During the fight, this is not an issue since Demonology and Affliction Warlocks both cast Shadow Bolt frequently enough to never worry about this dropping. But during execute, Affliction is also in their execute phase, and they're drain souling for much more execute damage than our Soulfires. So it's our job to keep track of ISB and keep it up amongst spamming Soulfires. I suggest a WeakAuras to keep track of it. One will be listed in the WeakAuras section. Next up, I wanted to briefly touch on Demonic Pact. At the start of the fight, I like to hold my pet until I get my trinket procs. Then I send him in. Trinket will typically proc really early onto the fight, so you'll only be missing a few seconds of the Felguard damage in trade for the biggest Demonic Pacts that you can get. Another time to watch is your second potion. I like to use this going into an execute phase with trinket, gloves, and whatever else plus meta if the fight was long enough to have a second meta. This will ensure another big Demonic Pact. Next part is about gearing. I won't go too far into detail on pre-raid BiS since I'm sure a lot of you watching this are past pre-raid BiS for tier 7. However, if you're watching this as a fresh 80, here's an easily obtainable pre-BiS to get you started. I left out any gear from TBC and any expensive gear besides the main hand that can cost a couple to a few thousand gold depending on your server you're on. This will plummet in price as the raid tier goes by, so you might be able to get lucky and get it cheap. But whatever, if you want more information on pre-BiS, I have a very in-depth pre-BiS video that lists all the BiS options and many more. It'll be linked above somewhere on the screen right now. As for phase 1 gearing, I also have a phase 1 best in slot video where I go into more details and show more options. It will either be linked or listed on my YouTube channel after this one. But for the sake of this video, and since this was made in phase 1, here's what I'll be going for phase 1 best in slot. It's more or less the same thing as Afflictions, besides swapping a few of those haste pieces for more spell power and spirit pieces. A side note to the trinkets, if you are the demo in charge of your raid's demonic packs, then your best in slot trinkets are Sundial and Dying Curse. The proc trinket's better than the static 200 spell power you gain from Illustration of the Dragon Soul. However, if you're more on the personal DPS side of things, then you can just blast. Then Illustration is best in slot paired with Dying Curse. I mentioned earlier that I personally opt to give a little more hit for some spell power and some spirit on my gear. This is an example of the gear list right here. In this set, I'm trading 1.25% hit and 2% haste for 141 spell power and 33 spirit. So it's a personal DPS loss, but you get to bring some more demonic packs to the raid. Once again, this is just some fieldcraft shit that I'm choosing to do. It doesn't mean that you need to do it. Just another option for those peer support demos out there. A side note about loot. As Demonology Warlocks, it's known that you more or less get funneled gear from your raid, which to a degree I agree with considering it all attributes to the big demonic pack buffs that were given the raid. That being said, know that it's super early in the game right now and don't stress if you're not getting all the loot. However, there are a few pieces of gear that are very huge in terms of the trade-off for demonic packs. Turning Tide, Dying Curse, and your 4 set is absolutely massive for Demolocks. Yes, of course the other gear helps as well, but they're much more minor in terms of spell power gains in comparison to the weapon and the trinket. Also remember that this is a new game and everyone wants loot. More loot spread around makes the raid happier, so try not to be too greedy, but also know that those big pieces are what you want the most. Gems are luckily pretty straightforward, for not only Demolocks, but for all the Warlock specs. You want to use Chaotic Skyflare Diamond for your metagem, and then use 2 Purified Twilight Opals to activate that metagem. Put Rune Scarlet Rubies in every single red slot that you have, and in the yellow sockets that have a socket bonus of Spirit or Spell Power, put either Reckless Monarch Topaz if you do not need to hit, or use Veiled Monarch Topaz if you do need to hit. You also have the Pure 16 hit Rigid Autumn Glow gems if you're really desperate for hit, but I've yet to use one of those thanks to suppression. Next, let's go over some WeakAuras and Macros that'll make your life easier as a Demolock. I've got an entire video going over every single one of my add-ons and WeakAuras that I implore you to check out. It'll be linked above and in the description as well. However, for the sake of this video, here are some WeakAuras and Macros that'll make your life easier. First off is the Warlock WeakAura. This is the most important one. This will keep track of everything you need in terms of your spells, dots, buffs, life tap timers, and everything else. The next one is the Decimation WeakAura. This will put fire around your whole body so that you know when you have Decimation up. Simple enough. The next one is the Demonic Pact WeakAura. This WeakAura will keep track of your demonic pacts, how much your current demonic pact is giving the raid, how much spell power was snapped, and what your current spell power is. This next WeakAura you can't really see, but it hides the release button spirit for 1 minute after you die in a raid, unless you're holding down control. This is to help you not grief yourself and release early before Sadie gets removed from you. If you release too early, then you won't be able to get lusted, so this just helps you with that. The next one is a WeakAura that will simply show when your pet is not attacking. This is very helpful for those that forget to send their pet in. You can also use a pet attack macro as well. The next one is a WeakAura to track your pet food. This WeakAura will tell you when your pet has no food. This next one is for engineering only, and it'll keep track of all your sappers, grenades, nitro boots, and whatever other engineering gadgets you have. It's very important so you can maximize your explosive utility. Next for macros, I typically have all my spells on a mouse over, meaning I don't have to click a target to use the spell. I just point my mouse on the target and press the abilities button. This is really nice as it allows you to not have to target anything else or worry about tap targeting. One thing that should 100% be mouse overed is your rank 1 Shadow Bolt. It looks just like this. Another really important macro that you can put with this is Demonic Empowerment, so then you don't need to worry about it. I macroed into my Shadow Bolt, my Incinerate, my Seed of Corruption, and my Soulfire. Looks just like this, but insert whatever other spell you want to cast with it. Another couple helpful options is to add a /pet attack to those same macros. It'll make your pet attack when you press those spells. This once again allows you to not worry about missing out on pet damage. However, be careful of 2 things. If you ever want to wait to let your Felguard attack, then adding a /pet attack will have him charge in right away. Not only that, but if there is nobody near you to attack when you press that button, your Felguard will run off to the nearest mob and start attacking it, even if that mob is on the other end of the raid. I personally do not like using /pet attacks, but that's my personal choice. Rather, I just use that pet not attacking WeakAura I talked about earlier and make sure he's attacking when I want him to. One very important macro for any Demolock is a form of this. What this does is allows you to spam your Metamorphosis key. If you don't use a macro like this, then if you accidentally press meta twice, it cancels your Metamorphosis. This just allows you to never need to worry about accidentally canceling it. This next macro will help you with your pet cleaves and bombs. First off, your Felguard doesn't use cleave on cooldown like you think he does. There is sometimes a hesitation as to when he casts it. Baking this into your Seed of Corruption, Shadow Bolt, or whatever will ensure that he uses it literally as soon as he's able to for more damage. The second part of this is only if you're engineering, and this will simply throw your Serenite bombs wherever your mouse cursor is, making it so you don't have to click twice to throw the bomb, but also ensuring that you won't forget about your bombs. We touched on this earlier, but feel free to macro Shadow Cleave to your instant cast abilities. Here's a simple example. Just put whatever other instant cast there instead. Note that this Q will cancel if you cast something after you press the macro, but this is still worth it as there's times when you move with Shadow Flame and the cleave actually gets off. A macro that pops all your cooldowns can be very helpful as well. Insert whatever potion here you're using and anything else you want to this macro. And lastly is the big macro. This macro varies per user. Some people like to put their meta, emo aura, shadow cleave, potion, trinket, and all other cooldowns on the same macro and pop it all at once. I personally keep meta separate as there's many times that I would like to metamorphosis but not emo aura and all that. So I use something like this. As I said, you can add or take out whatever you want from that based on your gameplay and from what you're doing in raid. Lastly, to round this long video up, I'll list some tips that might help out some. If you're watching this and you've got some tips, leave them down in the comments so we can all help each other out. I've been asked this a lot. If you can only meta one time during a fight, is it better to meta at the start or during your execute? And to answer that, you should be using meta with all your cooldowns at the start when they lust. You should always be looking to use your cooldowns with lust as much as possible. Next tip is to use the mouse over macro for rank 1 Shadow Bolt. A rank 1 Shadow Bolt is a 1-second cast and super helpful to snipe any low mobs that are 35% or under, so you can proc decimations and then use the decimation proc to slam soulfires into the boss. Next, this goes with the last tip, but you should always be looking for anything to snipe decimations with. There are many times in Nax and in this raid tier in general where you can snipe ads for an insane amount of extra damage. This is severely looked by the majority of Demolocks. The other day on stream, I even went and showed the top 10 Demolocks in the world, and none of them were trying to snipe low mobs on fights like a Noob, Grobulus, Sartharion, or any of them. So please have your eyes open and looking out for Deaths to snipe. The next tip, your threat when you pop meta, immolation aura, and all of that is extremely high. It is vital that you soul shatter or ask for a bot from the pally. I find it very helpful to place a demonic gateway down before I head into meta. This allows me to quickly escape when the threat gets bad. The next tip is to use WeakAuras and Macros. I know they can be really annoying at times to set up, but once you get them set up, they really help a ton and you'll see improvement immediately using them. Plus, all the ones you need are in this video and we've already talked about them, so just take the time to copy them in the game. The next one is to try not to waste your meta. It is a very big cooldown and it's not wise to use it on a pack of 3 or 4 when you could have just held it for an upcoming larger pack. At the same time, make sure you have your meta for the bosses, so make sure that when you do use it, you won't be starting the boss within the next 2 minutes. Next up is very important, probably the most important one, always be casting. Demonology does a lot of hard casting, meaning you need to stand still to cast. You want to be holding still and casting as much as you possibly can. Try to move as little as possible, and if you do have to move during a mechanic, then always cast something while you're moving. You should never ever be moving during a boss fight and not casting something. Use those short movements to refresh your corruption or your doom. If those don't need to be refreshed, then life tapping is also very important and is usually the go-to when I have to move. This makes it so you don't need to stop casting when you're holding still to life tap. Use your demonic gateway. Get in the habit of placing one down often. I place one down before big trash packs and even most boss fights when I know that there's a possibility of movement. This not only assures that you are hard casting more, but can also save your life, being able to quickly get out of shitty situations. The next one is to use your Inferno. The Inferno change is only a 10-minute cooldown and is a ton of damage and excels on big trash packs. As Demonology, it's not that worth using him on single target as much, considering he doesn't gain benefit from demonic knowledge or demonic pack, but you should still expect to use him on any big AoE packs or fights with ads like Faralina. What I like to do is to make sure that my pet gets a nice demonic packed off because it's there for 40 seconds, and then I go and get my Inferno out. The last tip is that you can shard farm on training dummies as long as it's your level. Well guys, that's it for this one. I sincerely hope I didn't bore you to sleep with this long one, and I hope this guide helps someone out there. As always, I stream over on Twitch at twitch.tv/CrixVibes, where I'm playing 6 days a week after I get all these guides done. And stop by to meet some new friends and vibe out. Feel free to hit me with any questions on stream or in the comments. If you'd be so kind to hit the subscribe button and the like button on your way out, as it helps me grow and it lets me know that you guys like these kind of videos. Until the next time, peace.